This is not Thomas in stereo. You have reached the Galion channel, where the focus is on promoting Galion products. Today, I will make a short video on tube rolling with the Galion TS 120. Now, many of you have started to receive the amp, and the feedback so far has been 100% positive. Some of you even compare it favorably to your line magnetic, high-end pass lamp amps, and so forth. Interestingly, this is without even tube rolling. There are two reasons why it sounds very good with stock tubes. The TS120 comes with good PSVANE-C tubes. So they're these are C-level tubes. Now in Asia, A tubes are the worst, B tubes are better, C tubes are above average. The best tubes are Z tubes. The second reason is that I voiced the Galion with stock tubes. I always ask myself this question. You know, many people who are into tubes, the first thing they do when they get a tube amp is change the tubes. Usually you get more smoothness with better tubes. But why not just make the amp sound smooth with stock tubes? The answer to that for me, after spending some time voicing an amp, is this. Number one, it depends on how much you are willing to spend on parts. Are you using cheap parts or quality parts? Number two, do you have the determination to spend hundreds of hours voicing your amp? Now, I got the Galion to sound amazing with the stock tubes because I had no problem spending good money on the capacitors. Now, talking about spending money on capacitors, you know my other upcoming amp, the Class A 15-watt solid-state amp, the original build had these two capacitors, okay, that cost $8. Well, not bad because people usually use $2 in capacitors in an amplifier. Do you know what the final version of my Class A amp has? Those two capacitors, I put $100 capacitors in. If you ever hear what a $100 capacitor can do, you will pay the price. So whenever I get an email asking me what tubes should they buy, I tell them, hold on for the Galion. Listen to it first and then talk about tube rolling. Some of you might have seen Jay's video with me on the TS120. He was only impressed with the TS120 after changing to 6550 tubes. That actually was part of the reason I keep pushing myself to improve the TS120. If I need to use C-Wing tubes to impress Jay, for me, that is a fail. If the stock tubes does not impress, it is not good enough. After filming that video with Jay, I worked on improving the TS120 a lot more. And right now, the amp is even smoother than when Jay heard it with the 6550 C-Wing tubes. Now, does it mean there is no point tube rolling with the TS120? Not at all. The incredible thing with the TS120 is I got it neutral enough that changing power tubes will change the sound significantly. Now, you might think that is normal, right? Change tube, change sound. But nope. With some tube amps I've come across, the sound only changes a little bit with tube rolling because I guess the amp is really colored. Now, with some tube amps, we would put crazy expensive tubes in and we still don't get air. Now, with the TS120, the front tubes, interestingly, the small one does not change the sound that much. I noticed the two outer tubes affect the soundstage while the two inner tubes affect the tone. So with some speakers, I have a hard time telling a difference. So that's why I never really bother with tube rolling the front tubes. So what about the power tubes at the back? When people ask me that question, I always reply, it depends on your system. Okay, so let me break it down like this. Lively tubes, TAD KT88 black plate, PSVANE, the silver ones, KT88 preferred series from the tube store. Now you use those tubes if you want more sharpness. Now for those who find the TS120 too smooth after break-in and you wish to regain that former sharpness when you first power it up, get the tubes mentioned above. If you take the Bukhara S400 for example, yeah, you know, it is a laid-back-ish speaker. You would pair it with the PSVANE silver KT88 tubes. Now that combo sounded very good to me. At the Toronto Audio Show, I used TAD KT88 because I was there to impress. I wanted the top-end clarity to be really apparent. but not to the point that it's too much. So that's why I chose the T80 over the PSVANE. The downside with that choice at the show is some people felt the TS120 sounded solid state. Yes, the TS120 has the dynamics of a solid state amp, but the air of a tube amp. The smoothness, however, would depend on the tubes. The three tubes I just mentioned, it is more about clarity over smoothness. Okay, there'll be some hard edges with those tubes, but not in a bad way. There's good brightness and there's bad brightness. These tubes are great for smooth sounding speakers. For example, the Sibelius, the Bucar S400, the Q Acoustic Concept 500, the CSS2T-DX tower speaker that I reviewed before. Now for the next set of tubes, let's say in your setup, the TS120 sounded great, but you wish there was a bit more texture and richness. You would use either the Mullard KT88 or the Galion KT88. The sharpness will not increase, but the clarity in the upper mid-range will be enhanced. The only thing, the extra richness may make the amp sound a bit slower. Now I personally like Galion and Mullard because with those tubes, there are no hard edges at all. Good for focal speakers, any neutral sounding speakers, bright speakers, no problem. Not as lively as the other tubes I mentioned before, but you will get the amp to sound closer, more like a traditional tube amp. Next, JJ tubes. I find them a bit more lively when compared to the Mullard and Galion. It is a good balance to get, right? Not as lively as the T80, but in between. Now the stock tubes are actually one of the smoothest tubes after break-in. In fact, for me, the special edition is a bit too smooth, so that is why I prefer to use Mullard or Galion. Next, no 6550 C-Wing tubes that you saw in Jay's video, either from T80 or Svetlana. Do not use them with the TS120. I've put in the manual, you will have problems with those tubes. If you absolutely want 6550, use the T80 6550A STR. If you use the 6550 with the special edition, the bass and lower mid-range will sound a bit thin. I personally am not a big fan of it. On the normal edition, because it is a warmer amp to start off with, it will make your normal edition's bass closer to the special edition. So for those of you who find the bass a bit too strong with the normal edition, get the 6550 STR from TAD. It is also less aggressive, and I once got a remark that with the 6550 tubes, the TS120 sounds even closer to a traditional tube amp. Finally, KT120. It will feel more effortless and fluid. The piano seems to have a bit more energy and it will be smoother. We measure it with the TS120 with KT120, and Class A you get about 40 watts, Class AB about 60 watts. For me, I don't usually use KT120 because I prefer to hear more texture with the KT88. Also, the first moment you listen to the TS120, you'll know right away you don't need more power than that. You will understand what the hype is about. So for me, KT120 is not a better tube, but rather a slightly different presentation. You get KT120 not for the extra power, but for a smoother presentation. So let me end the video with some observations, okay? So in the last few months, I let many subscribers take home the TS120 to listen. Every time before I go over, I ask what kind of speakers they have, and then I would choose the tubes that I think would best match their speakers. Guess what? 90% of the people don't even bother changing the tubes. For them, with the stock tubes, it is more than good enough. Every single positive feedback I've gotten so far from the people who have received their amp is with stock tubes. Okay guys, this is really a high level overview. In the next few months, I will keep looking for more tubes to try. For example, T80 is coming out with a KT88 red plate. Now that one I'm very curious. Okay, till next time.